All right, we are going to get started. Welcome everyone. Today, what we're going to be talking about is adult use marijuana in New Jersey. My name is Dustin Robinson. I'm the founder of Mr. Cannabis Law, and joining me today will also be Amanda Barton. She's a senior associate with our law firm. I'll be presenting the first half of the slides, and then Amanda will be presenting the second part of the slides. We're going to be going through a bunch of different information here in New Jersey. One thing that's important to kind of note is that New Jersey just passed its statute and they've created their commission, but they're still putting together the rules. So there's still a lot we don't know about what those final rules will look like, but it's important and it's a good thing that you guys are looking to kind of stay in front of it and see where we're at right now. We'll also be making, some predictions on what we might see in those rules and how things will be moving forward as far as the timeline goes. This is our disclaimer. Amanda and I both are not actually barred in New Jersey. So this is not legal advice. We're just providing this information for informational purposes. So definitely, if anyone is looking to create any sort of attorney-client relationship, don't hesitate to reach out. But the purpose of these slides is really just to give you guys an overview. So first thing we're going to start with, one of the things that's important that happened in this statute is what they did from a criminal perspective. I think most people who are on the phone on this line right now are probably more interested in going after licenses than they are on, not being arrested for a cannabis crime. So I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I think this really does provide some context. So it's important to understand what they're doing from a criminal perspective. So first thing is possession of 6 ounces of marijuana or less, or 17 grams of hashish is no longer a crime. So that's quite a bit of cannabis. So, 6 ounces is a lot. What's important in all these bullet points is that the adult use market still isn't open yet. They haven't licensed anyone. So it's still illegal to buy or sell these products. But really what this is mainly getting at is just the possession and use. So while the possession of 6 ounces of marijuana is no longer a crime, the purchasing or the sale of it would be. So it's kind of important to make that distinction. Being under the influence of marijuana by itself is no longer a crime. That is to be, really understood in the context of driving while under the influence is still a crime. So, while just being under the influence is not, driving is. The possession of marijuana drug paraphernalia is no longer a crime. So bongs, pipes, stuff of that nature, not a crime. The first offense for distributing an ounce of marijuana or less, or 5 grams of hashish, is subject to a $50 civil penalty. So just like I just said, even though they're decriminalizing possession and use right now, you can't actually buy or sell it. And even in the future, you won't be able to buy or sell it unless you actually have a license. Otherwise, you might get a $50 civil penalty. The Attorney General has ordered that prosecutors dismiss any pending charges for offenses that are no longer crimes under this state law. And then from a reasonable suspicion perspective, they have some stuff in there relating to smelling odor. And this has been a real big issue on the odor side when they passed the 2018 Farm Bill federally, because hemp and marijuana smell exactly the same. And now that hemp is federally legal, a lot of these cities and states have had a lot of confusion on what is really considered reasonable suspicion. So this is actually a very hot topic, this reasonable suspicion issue, really across the nation, and mainly because of hemp. So the main thing to understand is that the statute, the act was passed, and that's something that was done by the legislator. But what it did is it formed a Cannabis Regulatory Commission. And so this is a commission of 5 people. They've already been appointed, and they had their first meeting April 12th, 2021. These 5 people will pretty much be the ones that are going to roll out this legal framework. And even though New Jersey does have a medical market that's been operating for a couple of years, they do not have an adult use market. So how they roll it out is going to be challenging. And if you look at what's happened in pretty much all other states, almost everything gets challenged in this industry. Even the creation of this regulatory commission, when they first appointed the first 5 people, there was actually some challenges to that, and they actually made changes to the commission because of those challenges. So it's important to understand in this industry, we're going to talk about some timelines, but really still the legalization of marijuana is very new and there's really no blueprint for it. So a lot of these states are really struggling to get this done. So this Cannabis Regulatory Commission is definitely going to have their hands full trying to roll this out and trying to do it from an economical perspective, but also from a legal perspective without, getting lawsuits up the wazoo like most of the other states. So basically the commission has the following powers. They get to decide the start date of recreational sales. They're also going to establish the licensing. So they hold the power to grant or limit the number of licenses. We're going to talk about in future slides some of the limitations that have been put on growing, but within the statute. But it's important to understand that even though the statute has certain limits on only cultivation, the CRC does have some authority to be able to potentially place further limits on some of these other licenses. They also are going to have the authority to determine how tax dollars are spent. We're going to talk in some future slides about the fact that the act actually does have some provisions in there with respect to how these taxes will be spent. So while the CRC does have some authority, they also are getting direction from the actual act itself. So the legal market. So the rules will be adopted by the CRC within 180 days. And so essentially all these bullet points, what they're doing is they're kind of just rolling out what the timeline is. So the long and short of it is we expect that hopefully the interim rules and regulations will be adopted by the CRC by August 22nd, 2021. And that's really the earliest date that we think we'll be able to see adult use begin. What's also important to understand is that the medical marijuana licensees will probably get the first bite at some of these licenses, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. So what will happen is we are going to see that they're going to roll these out, hopefully the rules in August. They're going to open up applications. They should grade those applications, hopefully by the end of the year. And the latest date when adult use must commence per the act is February 22nd, 2022. So, those dates I've seen in many states, they put dates in the act and they don't stick to it. I know in Florida, we have a lot of dates. We haven't stuck to it. Illinois, which is pretty much the last state that had a real competitive process. We did applications at the end of 2019 for Illinois, and we're still waiting to hear from them. So there's been a lot of lawsuits and things filed. So, sometimes these dates get a little messed with. And so this last bullet point on this slide is very important if you're looking to apply. So they basically put a restriction within the act that during the first 24-month period, there's certain restrictions on how many licenses you could hold and what kind of licenses you could hold. So the first one is that a licensed cultivator, manufacturer, wholesaler, distributor, delivery service cannot also be a licensed retailer and vice versa. So in other words, if you're applying for a retail license, you cannot apply for any of the other class of licenses. Second thing we have on here is a cultivator or manufacturer may only hold 2 licenses at the same time, and a wholesaler cannot hold any other license besides a distributor license. So we're going to talk about on the next slide what each of these licenses means and what it allows you to do. But it's important to understand that if you're going to be doing wholesaler, the only other license you will be able to hold is a distributor license. So we actually get into the licensing in later slides. So right now we're going to jump into social equity. So a big part of all of these statutes is usually social equity. That's always a key component. Pretty much we're seeing in all states that are rolling out their programs, and every state kind of defines social equity a little bit differently. But really what it's focused on is a few things. It's focused on people that have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. It's focused on minorities, it's focused on females, and it's focused on veterans. So what we're seeing on this first bullet point is that at least 70% of all the tax revenues on retail sales of cannabis items shall be appropriated essentially to impact zones. And while the act has defined what an impact zone is, it has not actually provided a list of what cities and municipalities would actually qualify as an impact zone. So we're actually waiting for that information to come out. But what I have in here is kind of the definition of impact zone. And then actually there's even more parts to this definition than I have here. But essentially what they're getting at is these impact zones are really areas that have either been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs, or two, have a really bad unemployment rate, or three, are have a very high crime rate. So they're essentially trying to kind of allocate dollars into these impact zones to kind of help them out and move them forward, and in many ways right the wrongs of the war on drugs that disproportionately impacted these areas. The state's also going to establish an Office of Minority, Disabled Veterans, and Women Cannabis Business Development to serve and promote personal use among socially and economically disadvantaged communities. So you're going to see throughout the act, and you're also going to see once those rules come out, there's going to be a lot of different provisions for social equity. They're also allocating at least 15% of marijuana licenses for minority-owned businesses, 15% for women-owned or disabled veteran-owned businesses, and then 25% are reserved for applicants who have resided in one of these impact zones. So you're going to see that basically that adds up to 50% of the licenses are reserved for social equity applicants. What's really, really important to understand from this is that this does not speak to what the scoring system is going to look like. So just because they're saying at least 50% are going to be allocated to these types of applicants, what may very well happen when the rules come out is what happened in Illinois. What Illinois did is they actually allocated 20% of the points to social equity applicants. So in effect, in Illinois, if you did not apply as a social equity applicant, you had absolutely no chance of winning. So even though here we're looking at, only 50% is allocated to social equity. So if you're not a social equity applicant and you're not planning to bring on a social equity applicant, you may be thinking, okay, I'll just fall in within this other 50%. But I would kind of caution you before you start building your cap table and understanding the ownership and moving forward with your team. I would caution you that when the actual scoring comes out on how they're going to score these applications, you might find that without applying as a social equity applicant, you might be highly disadvantaged. So something to very much keep in mind. There's also some classes that they're providing priorities to. So if you're located within an impact zone, if you're a current resident of one of these areas, and then if you're an applicant who presents a plan to employ at least 25% of your employees from impact zones. So there's a whole lot of stuff that they're doing with these impact zones. You saw something similar in Illinois, where they consider you a social equity applicant, not only if you've been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs from an ownership and control perspective, but also if you're employing a certain amount of people who have been disproportionately impacted by the war on drugs. So there's kind of two things to keep in mind here. Either you could build your cap table and your ownership and control to satisfy some of these social equity components, or you could have an employment plan where you're going to be employing a sufficient amount of these social equity people so that you could qualify as a social equity applicant and get these priorities. Once again, we don't know what the scoring system is going to look like, so we don't know how all of this is really going to play out until the CRC comes out with its rules. So these are the different licenses you could apply for. So if you're looking to apply for a license in New Jersey, you have to figure out which type of license you want to apply for. So there's a grower license, which allows you to grow, cultivate, and produce marijuana plants and raw materials. There's a processor license, which allows you to manufacture, prepare, and package marijuana items. A wholesaler which allows you to store, sell, and transfer marijuana items only for resale. So a wholesaler cannot ship directly to consumers. And then class 4 is a distributor license, which allows you to transport bulk amounts of marijuana. Just to be clear, this distributor license is kind of more so like a transportation license. The distributor license essentially allows companies to transport between the different licenses. So a grower may need to ship his product to a processor, or a processor may need to ship the product to a wholesaler. So they're going to have to use one of these distributors to move that transport, to transport that bulk amount of product. Class 5 is a retail license. These are the companies that will be selling marijuana to the consumers. And then a class 6 is a delivery service, which obviously through the pandemic, delivery has become exceedingly popular. And we definitely believe that delivery services are going to be an important part of the future. And what I think will be interesting to see how the law develop is understanding, where the delivery services are allowed to pick up from. Are they limited to selling from the retailers, or will these wholesalers be able to potentially deliver as well? And we'll see how things develop as far as that goes. They also have micro businesses, and there's a definition for what these micro businesses consist of. But really what the purpose of micro businesses, and you see this in many states, is to kind of level the competitive playing field, so that people that may not have the economic means to build a company with hundreds of employees and a lot of people and stuff, if they don't have the capital, we want to make these businesses available to those that may not have those financial means. And that's really where the micro businesses come in. And so by the way, I'm seeing some questions come in. I do encourage you guys, if you guys have any questions, please you don't need to wait till the end. You could put your questions in, and then at the end, of course, we'll make sure we get all the questions answered. But yeah, if you want to ask any questions, you can either put them in the question and answer form, or there's also a chat box that you could put them in. There's also testing facilities. So you're seeing, testing facilities are becoming increasingly important in all of these states. So that's a big opportunity as well. All these products are required to be tested, so they need to move through a testing facility. And then what's also interesting is that New Jersey included a cannabis consumption area endorsement, which Amanda will be going over a little bit in the future. But one thing I'll kind of note on this is that you can't get a consumption area endorsement unless you have a retail license. So some states allow you to have a consumption license that's totally separate from a retail license. That's not the case in New Jersey. It's actually, you have to have a retail license, and it's just simply an endorsement on that license. Licensing continued. So there's no cap on the number of licenses issued to micro businesses. So currently there's absolutely no cap. So if you're interested in applying for a micro business, you have a much better likelihood, being that there's no cap, to be able to get one of those. Of course, as a micro business, you are limited in the size of the facility and the amount of employees and how much product you could actually acquire or sell. So 100% owned by current New Jersey residents who have resided in the state for at least the past 2 consecutive years. At least 51% of the owners, directors, officers, or employers shall be residents of the municipality in which the microbusiness is located or to be located, or a municipality bordering the municipality in which the microbusiness is located. You must have no more than 10 employees. And then if you're a cultivator, so those are just the general rules for all micro businesses, but then they have specific rules for depending on what class license you're going for. For cultivators, no more than 2,500 square foot grow space. So in Illinois, this was 5,000 square feet. They're actually making this even smaller here in New Jersey. So if you're a manufacturer, acquire no more than 1,000 pounds of cannabis per month to create the product. And if you're a retailer, acquire no more than 1,000 pounds of cannabis per month to sell. So it's, while to get a micro business license, it might be a little bit easier. There might be less competition and there might not be caps. You are quite limited in kind of the capacity you could take on and how you could grow your business. They do have a cap for cultivation licenses at 37 for the first 24 months. So this is non-micro businesses. The cultivation license is capped at 37. The other class of licenses currently are not capped, but what you'll see is that the CRC could very well put in caps when they put these rules in. So it'll be very kind of interesting to see how that plays out when the CRC comes out with their rules. Priority is going to be given to social equity applicants, and then applicants that include a significantly involved person or persons lawfully residing in New Jersey for at least 5 years as of the date of application. And so what they define as a significantly involved person is a person who owns 5% or is a decision maker in the organization that owns 20% of the cannabis establishment. So we're seeing all these kind of priorities for social equity, but once again, I caution everyone, we really won't understand what this all means until the CRC comes out with their rules and helps us understand what the scoring allocation is going to be. So I'm actually going to pause there and I'm actually going to kick it over to Amanda to take over for me.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Dustin, for sharing all that information. Very, very helpful. Now, the way that this is being set up in New Jersey is they really are encouraging applicants to work with the labor unions. So all applicants must submit a signed document attesting to the fact that they have entered into a labor peace agreement with a bona fide labor organization. We are also seeing that they must maintain that labor peace agreement on an ongoing basis. So for the full unconditional licenses, that's going to need to continue to move forward throughout the relationship and throughout the existence of the business. Additionally, you're going to see a lot of priority given to applicants that have collective bargaining agreements with a bona fide labor organization. And they're also going to give priority to applicants that are actively seeking to represent cannabis workers in New Jersey, and applicants that are either have a collective bargaining agreement or are working on a collective bargaining agreement or have a collective bargaining agreement in place with cannabis workers in another state. Applicants that submit an attestation affirming that they will be using their best efforts to utilize a project labor agreement will also be given priority, along with applicants that submit a signed project labor agreement. So they are trying to foster relationships with the various labor organizations within New Jersey. Could you switch the slide for me, Dustin? Sorry, I don't have capability. Moving on to social consumption. This is a very exciting area. I know we've been getting a lot of questions on social consumption, especially in New Jersey. So as Dustin mentioned, this is not a separate license. This is going to be considered like an endorsement, like an additional add-on to a retail license. So licensed cannabis retailers, they're going to be granted the exclusive opportunity to offer one social space, and it must be located at the same premises as the retail location. And it's going to be called a cannabis consumption area, or you're going to hear a lot to refer to as a CCA. The cannabis retailers will need to get endorsements both on the state level and from their local government. So if you're in a municipality or a city, you will also need to get endorsement from them as well. The local government, a municipality or a city, now they may offer authorization for CCAs for personal use, for medical use, or for both personal and medical use. So we're going to see a lot. We might see some differences on a local level as far as to what kind of CCAs are permitted. Now, a CCA, they did give some definition as to what that type of facility might look like. So it can be structured in two ways, either as an indoor, structurally enclosed area. Think of like a cigar bar. They're kind of modeling it after the cigar bars. They will, if you are going to do an indoor CCA, you are going to have to comply with the same regulations as a cigar bar as far as the air quality and making sure that you have proper ventilation and filtration. There's also an opportunity to make an exterior structure. You can either access it directly from the retail facility, or it may have its own entrance. While it can be outside and it be open at top, it will need to be surrounded on the sides by walls or certain barriers, because it is important that nobody from a street or public walkway or public area could see the consumption of cannabis going on in the CCA. So there are definitely some restrictions, but it's wonderful to see that they've incorporated this already into the regulations that they've released. Again, as Dustin's mentioned, we do not know the regulations quite yet, so there might be some additional restrictions placed on these social consumption lounges. A little bit more, I kind of got into this a little bit. The CCAs, again, you have to comply with the New Jersey Smoke-Free Air Act. This is going to be similar to the cigar lounges. The outdoor CCAs, again, it can be an exterior structure located on the premises of the retail facility, but it does need to be completely, not completely enclosed, but enclosed as far as sufficient walls, fences, or other barriers. Smoking and vaping, any of the smoke, they are concerned about it. It cannot migrate, seep, or recirculate into outdoor public places or workplaces. So if you're in a shared space or like a strip mall or something like that, you may have to take steps to make sure that you're handling the smoke that is coming from the cannabis consumption. The CRC may require additional requirements as well. So the municipalities, this is interesting. So they have, every municipality, they have the option to authorize and regulate the number of licensed businesses in their facilities, as well as the location, manner, and times of operation. So they might be able to set the hours in which you operate, specifically where they're located, whether it's near a school, a church, a hospital, things like that. Now, the municipalities have 180 days from the date of enactment of the act in order to decide whether or not they're going to opt out. So within 180 days, you can see some cities that are going to pass legislation that bans adult use in their municipality. We've already seen this with some communities within New Jersey. Now, if a municipality does not opt out within the 180 days, then marijuana businesses will be permitted to operate in that municipality for 5 years. So what we're seeing is a lot of communities are getting a little concerned about that deadline. So you may see some municipalities opt into it, but then later opt out. So if they don't do it within 180 days, they lose it for 5 years. However, if they opt in, they decide to opt out later at any time. So you might see a bunch of people jumping on board, and then hopefully maybe some of them will come around and be okay with adult use later. Now, what's interesting is similar to like Ocean City and their alcohol ban in New Jersey, the municipality cannot regulate the operation of the delivery services. So only the CRC has that authorization. So what's interesting is while they might prohibit adult use, that we don't believe that will stop actually delivery from occurring in those locations. So taxes, the state sales tax is going to be 6.625%. They're allowing an optional local tax of up to 2%. The optional cultivation exercise tax, so they might also impose additional exercises tax on the cultivators as well, as outlined here in this slide. In the first 9 months, it'll be 1/3 of 1% of the statewide average price of an ounce. And then after the first 9 months, it'll go up. It'll be $10 to $60 per ounce, depending on the annual price per ounce. We're also going to see that from the taxes generated from the adult use of marijuana, all those tax sales, 70% of it is actually going to be reinvested into the impact zone areas that Dustin was talking about earlier. They're really, again, trying to give back to communities that have been disproportionately impacted. So it's going to go into various things to try to help out with those communities. Now, the remaining 30% of those taxes will go paying the operational costs of the CRC. It's also going to be invested in county and municipalities and even the Division of State Police for training and the costs associated with the shift in officer training and troop and drug in a drug recreation expert program. And that's going to help train them on how to detect if someone is driving under the influence of of cannabis while driving a motor vehicle. And then if there's anything left over, it'll be invested back into the impact zone municipalities.
So we're going to open it up for questions. We already have some questions being asked. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you guys can all see us. And so basically, first question we have is, so they're asking if Class 4 licenses are restricted to just transporting from business to business, or could a Class 4 license also transport to a customer? And the way the definition reads right now, the Class 4 licenses are restricted to going from business to business. So if you want to deliver to a customer, which is really a much different business strategy, then you're going to have to get a Class 6 license. So Class 4 is for transporting business to business. Class 6 license is for transporting to consumers. So I encourage you guys, if you guys have any questions, just put them in the box and we'll get to them. Next question I have is, how many applications you think will be received? In Illinois, there's a population of about 12 million in Illinois, and they received several thousand applications for about 75 spots. So I think it was something like 3,000 to 4,000 applications in Illinois. New Jersey, I believe, has a population of around 8 million. So I think that you'll probably see a several thousand applications. And so when you look at the fact that only 37 licenses are available for cultivation, it will be very, very competitive to get one of these licenses. So we definitely encourage you to work with people who know how to draft these applications. We've done applications in a lot of different states through our consulting firm, and you want to make sure that you kind of check as many boxes as possible. Before we take on a client on this, we kind of have a Q&A where we get an idea of how willing a client is to really check all the boxes. And if you're not willing to try to check all the boxes, then you really don't have a shot. And we won't even take on clients like that, because we really want to take on clients that are going to have a really good shot at winning. And so, that's something to keep in mind. You want to check as many boxes as you can, because it's going to be very, very competitive. Next question is, what's the difference between New Jersey and New York law? So New York came on board right after New Jersey. Obviously, they're side by side, and in many respects will be competing with one another. One of the main differences, and by the way, we'll be doing another presentation on New York in the next several weeks. But one of the main differences is that New York seems to want to take some power away from the municipalities. So just like Amanda just went over, New Jersey is allowing these municipalities to ban dispensaries within their municipality. New York has provisions in there that kind of preempt those municipalities from doing that stuff. The other big difference is from a tax perspective. New York right now seems to have a higher tax rate, although just as Amanda mentioned, that there's still flexibility for New Jersey to add in an excise tax. So we might see that, New Jersey and New York end up looking pretty similar from a tax perspective, but obviously to the extent that New Jersey has much lower taxes, you're going to see that people from New York will probably be driving in, and buying product from New Jersey. So I think it's very important for, the people drafting these laws to pay close attention to, what each state is doing, because they need to remain competitive. Amanda, you want to take any other questions?
Sure, absolutely. I did see a question come in regarding, which areas have already banned and opted out. I do know that Ocean City has already banned adult use, and I believe I'm seeing some there's some other ones in the process. So we have Stone Harbor, Sea Isle City, Wildwood Crest, Cape May. They look like they're in the process of already starting to pass some similar ordinances. Wildwood and North Wildwood are expected to follow as well. Just as I mentioned, just because of the fact that if they don't opt in right now, then they're stopped for the next 5 years. So we do think that those are possibly also going to be jumping on the ban as well.
And then we got another question here on, will the medical licensees get the first bite at the apple? And the answer is yes. So we expect right now there are several medical marijuana licenses in New Jersey. And the way it's set up right now is that those medical marijuana licensees will be able to basically apply to get their licenses as adult use first. They will have to prove out that, I believe that they're able to satisfy the demand for medical before they're able to kind of start selling adult use, which right now I think there's about there's over 100,000 patients in New Jersey, and I think there's only like 14 retail stores. So right now it is a challenge just for these retail stores to meet the demand of the medical patients. So I think it'll be interesting to see how this plays out when these medical licenses have to prove that they could meet that demand so that they could be able to sell for adult use.
And piggybacking off that comment, also I've seen that there is some exceptions to them because medical in New Jersey is vertically integrated. So we were talking about how if you have license in one category, you couldn't have a license in another. There are going to be some exceptions to the current medical cannabis holders that don't make them to comply with that specific prohibition.
Yeah, it's an interesting little that they have in there. So yeah, those are all the questions we have. We appreciate everyone attending. Like we said, we'll be doing another one for New York, and we actually have a special edition coming up as well. We'll be talking a little bit about psychedelics as well. Our firm does a lot of work both on the cannabis side and the psychedelic space. So we believe, I think our next presentation will be on the psychedelic side. So be on the lookout for that. And thank you guys so much for attending. And we'll be posting this on our website within the next few days if you want to go back and watch it. So thank you guys and have a great one.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.